Okay.
Okay, Sandra.
Okay. Hey, I'm Sandra Norberg, and I'm honored to be the president of the UCSF Retirees Association. I'm sorry we're not in person, but welcome to this virtual spring luncheon. And this may actually be our last virtual luncheon because we have a holiday luncheon planned in person on December 7th at the Basque Cultural Center. So here's hoping. Okay. Um, since I can't offer you, or we can't offer you lunch or a glass of wine, but we do have an interesting program today. Um, First of all, a slideshow of the nature in San Francisco by one of our retirees. Our featured speaker, Louise Aaronson. Um, and then the presentation of the Francis Larragueta Awards for Exceptional Service, Volunteer Service. And that's for both this year and last year because we didn't have a meeting then. And then finally, the breakout rooms where you can meet and chat with other retirees and your friends in the subject of your choice. So I hope you've been able to take advantage of our speaker programs over the past year. We've been collaborating with UC Berkeley Retirement Center and to find speakers that would be appropriate for all of us, and taking advantage of the expertise from both of our campuses, but also bringing in people from outside. So currently we're taking advantage of a local chef who's doing a cooking series. And so last week you may have seen her demonstrate salads and appetizers. In July, she'll be doing main courses. And in August, she'll be doing desserts. This has been a great series, and I think we'll continue to collaborate with the UC Berkeley Retirement Center for future, and we'll announce those as they come along. So there are all these classes, these sessions have been recorded, and there will be a link available so that you can link to those. We don't have that quite set up yet, but we are going to send out an email to all of you with that information as well as other information that we'll go through today. Okay, so we've recently started a travel club. Okay, now you are going to be able to travel, so where do you want to go? So we've hooked up with the UC Retires Travel, and we'll be able to do trips both locally and overseas through Overseas Adventure Travel and Colette Travel. And very nicely, we have a special trip that is sponsored by UC Retirees next March, March 7th, to Spain and Portugal. It's the back roads of Iberia. Now, I've been there years and years ago, but I'm anxious to see those places again. They are very interesting. And again, they're reserving this trip specifically for UC retirees until the end of this month. So for more information and to get, for example, there is a brochure. I can be happy to send this to you. You can email me directly, Sandra@sandranorberg.com, but I'll send that out. We'll send that out to you as well. I'll also be in the travel breakout room if you want to talk about it more. But we'll be able to arrange our own trips locally if we want, or hook up with any of these trips, depending on where you want to go. So it should be pretty exciting. And now, so talk to your friends. These trips will be even more fun if you can be traveling with friends and colleagues that you know. So I want to now introduce Gail Harden. Gail is a vice president of the Retirees Association, but she's also the representative to the Council of UC Retirees Associations. And that organization represents and supports all of us. Gail?
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to tell you about some of the things that your Retiree Association is doing for you. As Sandra mentioned, we're part of the Council of all the University of California Retirees Associations, which is called CUPRA, and we work together with the Council of all the Emeritize, which is called CUSIA. The councils work together on a joint benefits committee, also known as the JBC, and they have accomplished so much for us in the past. And I wanted to go over a few of the things that they're working on right now. First is a delay in pension checks. Up until recently, when someone retired, there was a gap between their last payroll check and their first retirement check. And JBC is working to eliminate that gap. It's pushing for a new program, which is called No Lapse in Pay, to rectify this. In addition, they're working on the difficulty in reaching RASC. RASC is the Retiree Association Service Center. And they're the folks you call with the problem, although they've been having problems recently. And the JBC and Coulter and Coulter are working to rectify that. And another thing they're working on is improving the retirement process so that when someone goes to retire, it's clearer what steps they have to take. Then they're doing, they want to also initiate an evaluation process for retirement. So you could tell them what worked and what didn't work and hopefully improve it for that. They also want to increase funding for the healthcare facilitators. And also there's a push to get retirement counselors back on campus. UCSF is one of the few campuses that has a retirement council. Most campuses do not, and we find it very, very helpful. So in addition to all the great programs that we offer here at UCSF, this is another reason to support your retiree association, to support what's going on at the Coulter-Coulter level. Next, on to a different subject, we're introducing a new feature at the spring and holiday luncheons, which is highlighting retirees' talents and interests. Requests for participants will go out in an upcoming e-newsletter. It would be a 10-minute presentation. It could be art, could be music, photography, anything else that you're interested in. And today I'd like to introduce Richard Drake, who's a UCSF retiree from the Information Technology Department, and who is our first participant. Richard has enjoyed photography for over 60 years. Back in the days of film, his supportive parents built a darkroom in the basement of their house where he and his two brothers developed black and white photographs and printed them. His interest in photography continued into adulthood with a focus on landscapes, both natural and urban, and on nature photography. Richard went digital about 15 years ago, and since then has taken over 25,000 photos. Please join me in welcoming Richard Drake.
Thank you, Gail. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be the first in this series. I know there are a lot of talented people in the Retirees Association, and I look forward to seeing their presentations in the future. Now I'm going to share my screen and so that I can show you some of the photographs here. Let me get this started. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking generally about birds of Golden Gate Park and beyond. Now, during the COVID shutdown, Sandra and I tried to make a point of getting out every day to walk. And on those walks, I tried almost every day to carry my camera. We're fortunate to live close to Golden Gate Park, and so we often walked in Golden Gate Park and specifically around Stowe Lake. So let's start here. A good place to start if you're looking for birds or other wildlife is at Stowe Lake. There is a tree in the eastern end of Golden Gate, or in the eastern end of Stowe Lake, that I call the Heron Tree, because every year herons come back to nest there. Now, they used to nest in this tree down here, closer to the boathouse, but and that started in the 90s. But in about 2005, they moved up to this tree, to an island to a tree on this island. And these guys represent the best places to see the herons if you want to go and take a look at them yourself. Now, there are still a few there, but the fledglings, the young chicks, a number of them have flown away already. But as of yesterday, there were still 3 or 4 chicks there still being fed by their parents and in the nest in that tree. So essentially what happens is every year these great blue herons, which were really quite magnificent birds, return to Stowe Lake to nest. And they either build new nests or repair existing nests. here's a great blue heron flying out of a eucalyptus tree not too far from what I call the heron tree, with a twig that's going to be used to repair the nest. Now, the interesting thing about this beyond the photograph is that this heron hopped around the tree for 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes until it found just the right branch. And then it broke it off, and here it is taking off, heading for the heron tree. So now these are different birds sometimes because it's hard to get the same bird in the entire sequence because you have to be in a little bit different places. But at any rate, so here's another bird flying into a nest at the top of the heron tree with a twig. Most of the time, this is done by males, but both birds, do this. The bird that carries the twig in shares it with the one that's there. Again, it's usually the male carrying it in and the female in the nest. And then the female repairs the nest, or if they're building a nest, uses it to further build the nest. Now, when the nest is ready, the mom-to-be starts to lay eggs, plus or minus March 1st. And she lays 3 to 5 eggs, 2 to 3 days apart. So in 25 to 30 days, the first fledgling hatches. And at first, you can't actually see the birds because they're so small, the chicks are so small, but you can hear them because when it's time to eat, they chirp up a storm. So this particular photograph I took on May 1st. So this chick is plus or minus 4 weeks old, and it's just amazing how fast these birds grow. Now, both parents take turns feeding the chick, and the great blue heron birds hunt along the shores of the lake, and they look for a variety of prey, including fish and crayfish and snakes and rodents. And then the parents digest the food before they actually feed it to their chicks. So the chicks are receiving partially digested or digested food. And here is a parent feeding its chick. This was actually a 2020 photograph. Now, here's a great blue heron who has just caught this fish out of Stowe Lake, and I sat and watched this progress for just about an hour. And this bird caught a couple other things before it hit the jackpot with this fish. Now, the amazing thing is that not only did this heron catch this fish, but it swallowed the fish whole. Just amazing to watch. Just stretched its neck up into the air, and the fish went down its throat. Now, of course, the throat was a little bit bigger when it had done that, but still quite amazing. Now, here's another great blue heron who's caught a little rodent. Again, very, very patient, walked across this grassy area next to Stowe Lake, and I sat and watched this bird for quite some time. And it would just stand motionless over the hole of one of these rodents until, the rodent poked its head out. And unfortunately, this little guy poked its head out and became a meal for this great blue heron. Now, in addition to the great blue herons, there are what's known as black-crowned night herons. These are somewhat smaller birds, also, as you can see, quite attractive birds. I have a problem with this bird because it feeds on little birds, and Sandra and I, as we walked around the lake, watched this mallard duck who was raising 5 little ducklings, and we watched those ducklings decrease from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2, and we would see this great blue heron perched on a tree near where the duckling was nested. So we don't know for sure, but it's likely that some of those poor ducklings became meal for this black-crowned night heron. This guy's a juvenile common raven, and we saw this one just a couple weeks ago. And so this is a 2021 photograph. Whoops, let's see what's going on here. It's not. Oh, there we go. Now, another bird we see around Golden Gate Park quite often is a double-breasted cormorant. Now, these birds are quite interesting because as they've evolved, they haven't evolved feathers that are waterproof. I mean, waterfowl like ducks and geese, if you see when they come out of the water just, runs off them. The feathers on the cormorant get wet, and so after it's dived into the water in search of fish or other prey, it has to stand someplace in the sunshine or in a cooling breeze to let its wings dry. And this guy's standing on a drain pipe in the lily pond in Golden Gate Park. Now we're out of Golden Gate Park for a minute. We're over in Marin County, and this guy's drying its wings while it takes in the view of San Francisco from across the bay. Here we are at Crissy Field, and these pelicans are flying out the Golden Gate. If any of you have walked down there, it's a wonderful, wonderful walk. A nice 3 or 4 mile round trip from the beach to the Golden Gate Bridge and back. Lots of birds, lots of waterfowl, lots of nice scenery. These guys are heading out to sea to fish for themselves, and if you go down there, you will almost always see pelicans. Now, this guy was hanging out on a pier known as the fishing pier by the warming hut, and I think he was hoping to catch some fisher person who was distracted and grab some bait or even their catch. And you can look in his eye here, and I always had the sense that he was keeping a pretty close eye on me, even though he allowed me to get pretty close to him to take this picture. Back in Golden Gate Park, there's a lot of other wildlife, and here are some turtles. They hang out on the logs and on branches, on rocks along the shore in the springtime, catching the warming sun. Here's another bird at Stowe Lake. This guy is a Muscovy duck. I mean, he's a duck, but he's almost as large as a goose, and a pretty colorful guy. Another of my favorites out at Stowe Lake is the hooded merganser. Hoodie, as I call him, is an attractive member of the duck family, and I caught him sitting here on a log, just taking it easy. But talking about ducks, I mean, what could possibly be cuter than a baby duckling? I guess this guy may have been a week old, and I just, essentially lay down on the bank of the lake, so I could kind of shoot right into him as he swam toward me. Now here's a white-crowned sparrow. Splish splash, I was taking a bath, and this is a pretty little guy. I haven't seen him too often, but always fun to see. And here's another one. Let me see, I forget what this is.
Starling.
A starling, that's right. And of course, he's got a friend over here watching him take that bath. Now, back in the trees in Stowe Lake, and this tree is on the same island as the Heron Tree. Last spring, this large red-tailed hawk built a nest there, and we didn't see any young chicks out of that nest. So sometimes these birds do abandon the nest and go off to other places. And if we're having a bird beauty contest, this is a little gosling that would give that duck that we saw earlier a run for its money. Now, in addition, at Stowe Lake, you'll find some other wildlife, and this is a young raccoon who climbed into a tree to eat some fruit. Actually, was led up there by its mother. And every time I look at this picture, I look at that paw and just think, wow, it looks just like a hand, almost human. And using it just like a hand, too, to pull the branch in and get that berry. Now here's Mom. On another day, Mom was cruising around the shore of the lake, reaching under rocks, looking for crayfish and other goodies. And you can see right down here, she's got what's left of a crayfish in its paws. Now this is down by the buffalo paddock, and here hiding up in this tree, pretty well camouflaged, is an owl. Now, I think this may be the owl's chick, but I couldn't get a clear view of it. This is a pretty long telephoto shot, by the way. Now, as we've already said, life in the wild is uncertain. Here's a common raven attacking a seagull down at Ocean Beach. I just happened to be walking by and the raven flew over my shoulder and I turned around, and fortunately or unfortunately, this is what I saw. But we have beauty as well. And while egrets frequent Stowe Lake, this one is grooming itself along the bay. They groom themselves constantly. So it's not unusual to see them in these kinds of positions. This egret is reflecting on life down at the Crissy Field Marsh. And this bird just flew into the frame of a sunrise photo I was taking at the Bay Bridge a number of years ago. So I toss that in as well. Now, for some reason, it's the geese who always seem to pose for the more artistic pictures that I seem to come up with, as that the first photograph was also a goose out on the limb of that tree. And here's a goose nestled down on the shore of Stowe Lake with a low wave just catching the light, the last light of day, and a nice silhouette. Whoops, let's see. And then here is a goose watching the moon rise over Stowe Lake. Just happened to be walking along, and Sandra said, "Hey, look at that goose." And I turned around and fortunately got this shot. So that's my slideshow for today. If you enjoy photography, please consider joining the photography club or interest group that we're just now talking about forming. If you are interested, please, you can email me at richard@richarddrake.com. And if you have questions or comments or any corrections to the bird identified, to the birds I've identified, just give me a shout. Now, I'd just like to close by thanking Rosemary DeSanta for her help in identifying some of these birds. She's a much better birder than I. I'm a photographer, not a birder. And so thank you, Rosemary. Okay, take care, everybody, and thanks for your attention. Okay, so let's see, how do I turn this back?
Stop share.
Stop sharing, let's see, where do I do that?
It's at the bottom. It should be in red. So if you just take your cursor to the bottom of the screen, to the bar at the bottom, there should be a stop share. If it's not there, it will be in the corner, but it's usually a red button.
Or up at the top middle.
There we go. Thanks, Richard.
Sandra, unmute you.
Yeah, okay. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Louise Aaronson. And it's going to be hard to introduce her with less than a few minutes, but Dr. Louise Aaronson is a geriatrician, a writer, educator, and professor of medicine at UCSF. And she's also the author of a New York Times bestseller, Elderhood, Redefining Aging, Transforming Medicine, and Reimagining Life. And if you haven't read it, it is a really good book to read. Dr. Aronson graduated from the Harvard Medical School and also attended the Warren Wilton Program for Writers. She's received numerous awards, including a gold professorship in humanism in medicine, the California Home Care Physician of the Year Award, and the American Geriatrics Society Clinician Teacher of the Year Award. Her writing appears in numerous presentations, numerous publications, and you may have seen her, and I've seen her name go by as speaking in many other places as well. So Dr. Aronson will actually answer questions at the end of the session, and if you have a question, you can put it in the chat, and we can, and Louis Gutierrez will read that to her later. So Dr. Aronson.
Terrific, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I see a couple of familiar faces, or I did until I moved to this version of my screen. But anyway, hi to everyone I haven't seen in years and years. So I'm going to use some slides usually because that makes it more entertaining, although I will warn you in advance that mine aren't as nice as Richard's in terms of photography. So here we go. We were sort of discussing what I should talk about, and it seemed pertinent to discuss aging and ageism, which are my two favorite topics really, but also contextualize them, particularly on this day as in theory we are being liberated, or our state is. So I'm going to get going. You know, does age matter? I think we all know that after age, I'm not sure what, it seems to vary, 45, 50, 55. At some point, it becomes clear that this pertains to us as well as other people. But the pandemic really brought this point home with the death rate being about 80% in people age 65 and older. Now that's interesting because a lot of people think that's all about biology. And if there's one message I want to get across now, it's that yes, biology matters, but a lot of the deaths were unnecessary and they were due to policies and social decisions and all kinds of things that can and should be done differently. And I am of the belief that we are the generations who are going to figure out how we do this long, many decades long phase of elderhood. So, oops, sorry, I have a new mouse that tends to go rogue on me. Okay, we also learned from the pandemic, though, that age wasn't everything, because this was mortality among people between the ages of 75 and 84. And you can see that if you were Black, your rate difference was nearly 900, and Latinx 500 plus, Native American 200. So this alone shows us that how our social conditions and our policies can really affect what one's risk is from COVID, but think of COVID as a metaphor for aging generally, how we do or don't offer opportunities, how we do and don't make spaces elder friendly. So this is death from COVID-19, and you can see it really goes up with age. But there's also the truth that death goes up generally with age, because at some point we always get to 100%. And so we're not going to change that. And yet sometimes people use that as an excuse for not making elderhood as safe and fun and filled with opportunities as it can and should be. There's also a real irony, because at this moment where everybody's equating old people with dying old people in nursing homes, our government is being led, and this doesn't even count Tony Fauci, also age 80, but the president at age 78, the Speaker of the House age 81, and the head of the Senate age 70. So we get these mixed messages, and yet people seem to see only the negative and not the positives and the potential. The real truth is, of course, complex. It contains all those truths at once, and that makes for a pretty tough soundbite. There's Tony. I couldn't remember if I had put his picture there. So what age is old? Well, it depends a little bit on your perspective. If we were doing this in person, I was kind of hoping we'd be in person and then I'd get you to vote, which is kind of a fun exercise. But you'll see that I've got some outliers here. So I've got 30 at the top, because there was an article in the New York Times a few years ago about a relaxation retreat for people who are stressed out, older workers who were particularly stressed out in Silicon Valley, because it's hard to be old in Silicon Valley, and you had to be 30 and above to attend this event. So, old age is partly depends on who you are and where you are. And I've been to retirement communities where I get to age 85, 95, or 100 with this question. Some people still haven't raised their hands, although at that point there's a fair number of giggles. So there is the perspective from this book from decades ago that old age is always 15 years older than I am. And yet, at some point, that's probably not true. So the Pew Research Center did a telephone survey, and they found that when you think old is depends on how old you are. So young people thought old age started sooner. Funnily, though, they also thought youth lasted longer. So for them, adulthood was this 20-year period, squeezed in between a very long youth and a very long elderhood. Anyway, people age 65 and plus move it up to age 74. And this is an interesting range because I looked for the book across cultures and across across civilizations and decades and centuries. And almost always legal old age began between the ages of 60 and 70. And the very few exceptions were age 75. And that's really different from how we've come to think about it in this country, where we equate old age with disability. Even though walking down the street, we all know, here's a person who's young, here's a person who's middle-aged, here's a person who's old, at least when it comes to other people. This was also funny, binary question, so apologies for this, but that was how they approached it. They asked men and women at what age a man is old, and they agreed that it was age 70. But when asked at what age women become old, men said 68 and women said 75. So once again, there's a whole lot about who you are that determines how you see this. There was also this work from a guy at Stanford called John Chauvin, who looked at Social Security life tables, and in the century leading up to pandemic anyway, found that each stage of life, if you defined it by your annual chance of dying, had really moved forward, like, a shift on the curve about 20 years. So was everything getting older? Was old age getting older? Were we fitter longer? Chances were we were. The pandemic kind of changed the odds in some way, except for that if it didn't affect you, it probably didn't affect these changes so much. So really interesting. Also some evidence in recent years of a plateau or return. And I would argue that that has less to do with biology and more to do with health decisions, and health decisions not just once we are in old age, but for our children and our grandchildren and all the generations, because aging begins, according to biologists, in utero, if not before. And the decisions we make all along the line, in addition to some good or bad luck, can really determine how we make it through life, how long we are alive, and how long we are fit. So where are we now at this interesting moment in history, when we're living so much longer than we ever did before? So let me start by talking about the language of old age. This is a picture of all the terms people like to be called when they are old. If you're seeing a blank piece of paper, it's because you're seeing a blank piece of paper. Nobody likes anything. They don't like old or senior or elderly or geriatric or anything. And I would argue that's because of the prejudice against old age, because those words, sort of similar to young, teenager, tween, whatever else you want to call someone who's something other than old, these are equivalents. There's no value judgment. It simply means a person who has been alive longer than many other people. So in an ideal world, we all get there, and yet ageism is so entrenched in us that nobody wants to be called some of the neutral terms that describe, being alive more than 60 years. We also tend to tell certain stories about old people. So this is the exceptional older adult story. So you see here the Chinese model on the left, and this woman who appears to at least be in her 80s on the right, doing splits in a way that I don't think I could have done when I was 8 years old without causing serious damage. Anyway, so like maybe she was always exceptional, and when we hold up exceptional, it means like it doesn't pertain to most of us. So often a not helpful narrative, because you can say, well, I don't have to exercise because I'm never going to do the splits like that lady. And then the other big popular thing in the press is the Silver Tsunami, which you got to admit has a certain ring to it. The downside is that there's no upside to tsunami, right? There's nothing good about it. Civilizations, individuals, all destroyed. It also, as in this particular picture, lumps all old people into a single colorless group, which flies in the face of all evidence throughout time. And it pits them against young people, when in fact, a well-functioning society, and actually in job contexts, the most well-functioning teams have people from multiple generations. So it's inaccurate and harmful. And it gives people also the mistaken notion that there's nothing we can do about either our own aging or the growing older adult population. And that leads to problems like this. So I'm going to use a few highlights from the pandemic. You probably heard this term boomer remover. Now, some people said, oh, well, we were just joking, but it wasn't at all clear that everybody was joking. And when we have such an ageist society that allows, the aging of our population, right? So we want to, nobody wants to die. And yet, as we grow older, we then complain about that. It's kind of a lose-lose situation. You also get things like this from Time magazine. So big influential magazine, The Road to Recovery, How Targeted Lockdowns for Seniors Can Help the US Reopen. Okay, admittedly, in recent history, we have locked up children on our border, among other things. So yes, we do lock up people. We locked up Japanese Americans in World War II. But are we usually this blatant, particularly with an entire category of human? Usually it had to do with some othering. So now everybody who's old is put in this category. I also think it's interesting. Oh, shoot, this mouse. Sorry, I'm not good at reading the manual. How the US also sounds like us versus seniors, as if seniors aren't part of the us that makes the US population. And then ironically, also on the day of George Floyd's funeral, in a big international publication, an ethicist argued that age discrimination was acceptable. You can make that case of you're in a sinking boat and there's an 8-year-old and an 88-year-old, who do you save? But that is a really bad analogy for our very complex society. We also don't hear much about the good news about old age. So this is called the U-shaped curve of happiness, and it has been proven in all but the poorest societies and in all but the most marginalized subgroups of not poor societies. So not everyone, but the vast majority of people on this planet. And what it shows is that happiness tends to be lowest in middle age and then go up. And at the same time, anxiety goes down. I'm hoping you all are not as constantly stressed now as you were when you were working at UCSF, and you have my envy. And then we also see that life satisfaction goes up. Now, some people will see this and say, well, that's just not true for me. These are averages. And on average, this is found again. So a guy called Blanchflower, I don't think I put the reference in, reviewed all the articles on this in an economics journal last year and found that it still holds. So really interesting. Why don't we hear about this? Why instead do we just hear the negatives? And this may explain why older adults seem to have overall less mental health effect from COVID-19. And some of you may have been seen in that great medical journal, the New York Times, this article about why older people managed to stay happier through the pandemic. And it basically talks about that people over age 50 have more positive emotions in a day and fewer negative ones. This is thought to be one of the things that improves with age alongside vocabulary. That experience of resilience leads to a sense of focus, and also perhaps that being closer to the end of life enables people to prioritize better. You know, you have this sense when you're young that you're going to live forever. You might know intellectually it's not true, but you feel you have plenty of time. When you have less time, maybe you pick not so much what is for vanity or necessity as opposed to what is really meaningful to you, as long as you have enough, obviously, to meet your basic needs of food and shelter. And one thing that helps us think about this comes from a British public philosopher called John Berger, who had a TV show and then a book in the 70s about ways of seeing. And he talked about how what you see, he was talking about photographs and paintings, what you see really depends on what you're told and what the surround is. So here we see a painting by Van Gogh and you see vibrant colors. I mean, this was particularly when I was looking for this in pandemic and I just hadn't seen art or colors or, you know, been out in nature. I mean, you know, and then you see that the bold lines and you think of the period in time when he was an artist. And it's pretty impressive. And then when you hear it was the last painting he made before committing suicide, You might look at it a little differently. You see those birds as maybe circling. You see the path as a path to eternity or a path to nowhere. You see the dark, thick lines as maybe expressing his frustration and hopelessness. So what you're told really depends on, determines what you see. Similarly, here we see an old woman. To my eye, she looks to be maybe early 80s. She's bent. So, as a doctor, I'm thinking, ooh, osteoporosis. Has she lost height? She's got one jacket on and boots. So maybe it's cold out, but then she has another jacket because it gets harder to regulate your temperature as you get older. So maybe she'll put on the shorter jacket when she gets wherever she's going. Who knows? And so you see one thing, and she's by herself, and most women by their 80s have lost partners. So there she is by herself. And then I show you another picture of her a few years earlier. So this was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the justice. And in the first picture, she was on her way to work. She was probably thinking about the opinion she was going to write that day, and she was surrounded by her Social Security detail, but I cut them out. So, really what you see depends a lot on what I tell you and what I show you, or what I don't tell you or don't show you. And that's very true of aging. Such as here are numbers of deaths in long-term care facilities in May, so early on in the pandemic. And what you'll see is that it looks like in Minnesota, the death rate was 4 times that in long-term care as it was in New York. Now, is there any biological reason why people in nursing homes in Minnesota would be 4 times more likely to die than those in New York? There is not. And this is how statistics get distorted and manipulated. Because it may be Minnesota didn't have very good controls, but it actually turns out to be more true that New York was in its huge surge, that big early surge that was so bad in New York. So a few things happened. One was that people of all ages were getting sick and dying. The other was that they paid no attention to nursing homes, so nothing was counted. And indeed, in May, the federal government said that deaths in nursing homes before May did not count. So literally those people's lives did not count. This is how policies and politics can determine what we see and whether or not we think there's a problem. And that could get into our heads. This curve is really hard to understand. Just know that places with fewer whites, more Black Americans are in the blue colors, and more whites and fewer people of color in the orange colors. So early on in the pandemic, we were seeing more deaths in places with more people of color. But in this past winter surge, there were far more deaths in white people. Why was that? That was because the media was talking about how the pandemic was very much a problem of people of color. And so it's pretty clear in retrospect that white people did not take the precautions they should have been taking, assuming they were immune. So once again, what we say, what we see, what we're told can really influence the course of our lives in ways that are pretty significant. How we frame aging is so important. So this is from Boston's anti-aging campaign called Age Strong, sort of playing off their Boston Strong from the marathon. And this gorgeous woman, age 86, says, "Over the hill, I'm a lot of things, but over the hill isn't one of them." Well, I don't know, but most hills I see, or at least when we're making cartoons of them, right? It's just a lump, and you've got about equal amounts from the top of the hill. You've got about equal on both sides, and that's often the case in real mountains, also in real hills. So at 86, she's solidly over the hill. If the average age of living, in America is in our later 70s, that means we're over the hill by 40, the vast majority of us. So is the problem being over the hill, or is the problem a society that starts discounting people the minute they're over the hill? Which, if you're a person of color in this country, might mean at age 35. So how we use our language, how we think about this is so important to whether we get resources or policies that enable us to keep working and thriving as we grow older. It has influence on everything. So this is from the CDC's COVID site. And you can see that It has a list of all the things you need to do. It also has a great pullout section on children and teens with 9 different subcategories. Now, children are 15 times less likely than a person in their 20s to get or die from COVID, and teenagers are almost the same. But older adults, especially people over age, over age 60 something, it's 1,400 times more likely to die. And over age 85, it's 7,600 times more likely to die. And so where is the section on old people? I mean, it'd be fine not to have one if you hadn't pulled out children and teens, but since we're doing this by age, where is the section on old people in a pandemic that is highly preferentially killing old people? Oh, it's missing. Yes, children and teens were hurt in other ways, but literally, this is a year into pandemic, and it's not present. That's what happens when we can't even talk about old age. You can find a page. You have to go to people at increased risk. And so this is a very different standard. That was the initial page. And then more recently, they have this longer page, but there's still very little. And older adults with their 80% death rate are put alongside people who are breastfeeding, people with various other problems, all of which matter. And yet, are we doing this proportional to need? We are not. So this was Ursula K. Le Guin, who died a couple years ago and was initially a sci-fi writer and then just generally a smart woman thinking about writing and life. And in one of her last books, she talked about how if you tell me my old age doesn't exist, you basically tell me I don't exist. Age is always a part of our identity. To pretend otherwise is to deny also the decades of life experience, but also the current reality. As she captures with this is my favorite quote: "If I'm 90 and believe I'm 45, I'm headed for a very bad time trying to get out of the bathtub." So yes, age matters. And the more we accept it, the more we, have a nice walk-in shower or something like that we can enjoy. And this was from Bob Butler in the 1970s. He said, "This tragedy of old age is not the fact that each of us must grow old and die, but that the process of doing so has been made unnecessarily and at times excruciatingly painful, humiliating, debilitating, and isolating." Now, this is getting better. The pandemic has been a bit of a setback, but when I became a geriatrician, I might see something in the lay press a couple times a year about aging. And now I literally can't keep up on a daily basis. So we can all be part of this in how we speak, in what we do, and how we think about old age. So now I'm going to turn towards more positives and what we can each do in ways small and large to make these decades of our lives more fulfilling. One, and this is admittedly my bias, as you saw for the title of the book, is that we acknowledge that life is a 3-act play, right? There's the beginning, the middle, and the end. Each one is incredibly important, but serves unique functions. And we have names for this: childhood, adulthood, and elderhood. We don't acknowledge it overtly, and yet we acknowledge it in ways that are covert and often nefarious. If you Google the lifespan, you will get a picture like this, which basically shows 4 categories of youth. You have the infant, the toddler, the child, and the teen, and then 4 categories of adulthood. You have the young adult, you have 2 adults, one, sort of still in the family phase for those who do that, and then a little bit beyond that, more in the raising the family phase. And then you have, people who look a bit like me, the woman and man that are almost the last one. So I'm in my late 50s now, definitely need the glasses, hips a little wider than they once were, to my endless disappointment. There I am. And then the next category is a wheelchair, but I have a mother 30 years my senior who doesn't need a wheelchair. So why have we given 4 categories to childhood and adulthood, but 1 wheelchair to elderhood? The wheelchair may be part of it for many of us, but it's a small part of a many decades long phase. So we need a language, and we need policies that acknowledge these decades and their tremendous diversity and the diversity of those of us within them. How do we do that? Well, lots of groups are working on it, including the World Health Organization. So I'm just going to finish up here by going over their 4 key points, because it's really not a bad place to start. And I like too their definition of healthy aging, which is being able to do the things we value for as long as possible. So the first one, I'm actually going to go in reverse order because the first one's a little bit of a downer. It gets more positive as we go. So develop systems for long-term care. I think the pandemic certainly showed us that, we knew older people were dying in China and Italy and Iran and Spain and everywhere else. So the first outbreak was in a long-term care facility, but we didn't actually provide people with PPE or testing for the better part of the first year. And as a result, although 4% of all cases were in skilled nursing, 32% of deaths happened there. These were preventable. Indeed, there was an article in New York Magazine talking about one of the ways in which it was preventable. In the first surge in New York and New Jersey, the governors made a decision as hospitals filled to take older people who were still sick, but no longer acutely ill, and send them to nursing homes. So they sent them to facilities that are not as well equipped as hospitals for lesser care. So many of them died, but they also took COVID with them into places where there was no PPE, there was no ability to test, and there was no advanced preparation. So they brought a lethal virus to other people who lived there, who then died. So as this author concludes, these horrific totals were not inevitable. The virus is an efficient killer, but it had its accomplices. So what do? We stop doing this thing where we don't want to think about it because nobody wants to end up like this. So instead of not thinking about it, why don't we make it better? I love this James Baldwin quote, which was obviously about being Black in America, but pertains here too. People who treat other people as less than human must not be surprised when the bread they had cast on the water comes floating back to them poisoned. So we need to create a long-term care system that we want to grow old in. We did learn one thing of huge value in the pandemic, and that was that smaller places, greenhouse type facilities, where you had smaller social groups that could continue interacting, that can eat when they want, where staff are paid better living wages, had very few cases and deaths compared to bigger places. The entire VA system has committed to this approach, and it's under review for the state of California. These are places where both staff and residents are happier and where you are less likely to be killed in pandemic. So we already have approaches that make a difference, but in past decades, we have chosen not to implement them. We all need to make noise so that if we need them, when we need them, they will be there for us, places we won't be sad to be in. Really important if you're a solo ager or frankly, if you're female. What's needed for healthy aging? Well, we need to align health systems with the needs for older people. This is the population curve in 1955, lots of kids, hardly any old people, and it's turning from a pyramid into a rectangle. And so more and more older people. But that's not what we teach in medical schools. Actually, I should say in medical schools, including at UCSF, you get months of pediatrics, you get years of adult medicine, and you get a couple of weeks of medicine for older adults. That's a huge problem, but it's not just UCSF, it's all over the country. And indeed the CDC, which admitted to the very different deaths from COVID in the different age groups and started showing it by age decades, still released this vaccine schedule, which you don't need to read in detail, but know that vaccine schedules are set based on biology, immune systems, and social behaviors. So they've got 17 for kids, and for adults, they've got 3, and for people age 65 plus, they've got 1. So my oldest patient was 111, but generally, routinely, we have patients up to 105. So that means that's a half century. So in 50 years of life, are we going to say the biology, immune systems, and social behaviors of people don't change? Absolutely not true. Indeed, many of you may have had the high dose flu shot. Actually, I hope you did. Why is that? That's because the higher dose elicits a better immune response. We know that's needed. We know a lot about aging immune systems, but we don't apply it structurally even. So when you look at this, this says to people age 65 up is all the same, and it doesn't matter as much as the other groups. So this is structural ageism in the Centers for Disease Control. It's also sad because you can look at data going back decades, and what you'll see is that risks for this one is adverse drug events on the left goes up with age, but it actually on the right, you see there are real important differences between people in their 60s in blue, in their 70s in green, and in their 80s in red, and also within these categories, depending on a person's health. But age matters, and to say that adults, that adults are all the same, and that in this age of 10,000 new medical journal articles every year, somebody can take equally good care of somebody in their 90s and somebody in their 20s. That's probably not true. That's why over a century and almost a century and a half ago, we broke off pediatrics. We really need to focus on the unique needs and social circumstances of older people in medicine, but we don't. What we can do is think of health equity across the lifespan. If we're going to pull out children, we need to pull out elders. So when people are talking about kids and adults, we need to remind them about elders. When they're talking pediatric and adult, we need to add geriatric. And it doesn't mean like we're never going to make enough geriatricians. So I'm not doing this in a self-serving way. I'd love to be doing it in a self-serving way, but that ship has sailed. What we need is people who know what they're doing and who've studied bodies and lives and can understand how to take care of them. This is for every category of person in healthcare. What else is needed? Age-friendly environments. Most older people want to age in place. There is a big age-friendly communities and age-friendly cities movement. San Francisco is part of that. Oakland is part of that. There's one in Marin, but I can't remember where. Get involved. This has to do with everything that matters to our lives, the ability to participate socially, civically, a job if you want one, whether for pay or not, IT capabilities, health services, outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, housing, everything. And also, if you're doing anything to your home, make it a place where you can grow old. Round doorknobs, not so good with arthritic fingers, but these lever ones, much better. Great in pandemic too. You could use your elbow. Bathrooms can be either not welcoming or equally attractive but welcoming. You can only find high-end bathrooms online. Sorry. So yes, I mean, we may not all have $1 million for our bathroom, but you get the general concept. Similarly for playgrounds, we have areas for kids and areas for adults, and communities are increasingly starting to add places for older adults. This includes pickleball, Tai Chi areas, areas for weight training, all those things that we need to maintain our balance and fitness as we grow old, which exercise and physical activity are the #1 thing you can do. It is the only drug that we have that treats like 15 or more conditions. So, worried about your brain, worried about Parkinson's, high blood pressure, heart disease, cancers, mental health issues, trouble sleeping, weight, function, etc. It's the only one that treats all of them. We have to acknowledge that it's not race or age, that these two things come together, and they often come together in really evil synergistic ways. UCSF was the place where White Coats for Black Lives began. But a lot of times older lives are left out of that. And we have seen lately the impact on older Asian Americans in our own community in San Francisco on the Pacific Rim, how people feel free to lash out at people in their 70s and 80s because they are Asian. So we need to be part of this larger movement as well, thinking about age and race together. And lastly, we need to change how we think. That's basically what this whole talk is about. This is another one from the Boston campaign. I'm many things, but not frail. We will all become frail. So rather than othering people who are frail, let's create a world in which we can be frail, but still enjoy our lives and still be part of our communities. This is where the aging and ability communities should really be working together. I'm going to skip that part in the interest of time, and I'll just, as a second to last key point, say that internalized ageism is really bad for your health. There's a researcher at Yale that's done a lot on this. It increases your levels of cortisol, which lead to premature aging. She's shown this in a variety of contexts, including that your first cardiovascular event, heart attack or stroke, happens 7.5 years earlier, including your ability to recover from disability or hospitalization, including your longevity. So thinking positively about your aging, using those terms makes a huge difference. So this is, I'm going to finish with this. It's San Francisco's Anti-Ageism Campaign, which had just gone up and then pandemic hit. But if you were at Civic Center, you might have seen it. So these are pictures of 5 San Franciscans. In the middle over their eyes is them now as older adults, and then around them is them younger. And so that was really just to remind all of us that inside every adult is an elder in training, and in every elder is an adult who matters. In fact, you're all the people you were before. So what if the greatest limitations of aging come from our imaginations and policies, not our physiology? That's not to discount physiology, but there's so much more we can and should do that'll be better for all of us, both selfishly and communally. And with that, I will stop and happy to take any questions.
Hi, everyone. If there are any questions, you could go ahead and put them in the chat. It's found at the bottom of the screen. So I do have a question. Is there counseling training available to caregivers so we can do best for our elders?
Oh, such a good question. There are increasing caregiver programs. There are caregiver academies, sometimes through Alzheimer's Association. UCLA has a really nice one, actually. iCare, I think, is the acronym. Very, very smart. It's hard to find general programs, but there is the Caregiver Alliance. There's a lot of information online. We're trying through UCSF to create some training programs through the activities program as well. But this is one of those areas that's so important to so many people, actually of all ages, because there are a lot of younger people caring for older adults now. So something that would be really good to pull together either within this community or more generally. There's not enough yet coordination in that sector.
Here's a fun comment. I frequent a business that gives a life experience discount, which I think is a positive way to frame our status in society. I think that's nice.
Yeah, I agree with that, E. I also think, though, it's pandering to the ageism so that if people don't want to be called senior or elder or elderly. So I feel strongly both ways. Like, I love it, and that's true. That's a good frame. And it's probably because the third rail of all the terminology for aging.
And then great presentation. How do we prepare in support of each other should there be another situation like the recent pandemic where we had to lock down our elders in care facilities? What methods could be considered in the future?
Well, part of the lockdown was that there wasn't enough PPE and there wasn't the capability for testing. But this too was political. So for instance, in San Francisco, one of the city supervisors made it so that everybody in all SRO hotels were tested. That is a high risk population, but the incidence of COVID positivity was very, very low. We already knew it was high in elder care facilities, but the city did nothing to help those facilities for a very long time. In fact, they would help with testing only once there was an outbreak, as opposed to surveillance testing, which might have caught cases early and prevented outbreaks. That's actually been shown in studies. So really prioritizing the people at highest risk. There are also 6 bills in front of the California legislature about reforms for long-term care. They're not perfect. There are more changes in the current system, but really getting involved with that, particularly, I think, it's the rare person who looks forward to moving into that kind of place, and we all hope that won't have any pertinence. But I think we improve aging generally by taking that extreme situation and making it better.
Are there clinical trials that we can participate in to help studies on ageism?
Oh, on ageism. That's so interesting. Yeah. So I know Becca Levy, although she's on sabbatical this year, there are many trials of different kinds. There are ones through UCSF Geriatrics. You can always contact us and we can connect you. Becca Levy's lab at Yale does ageism studies and knows about all the other ones and is always happy to hear from people. And there are probably some others through the American Geriatric Society. So if people are interested, let me know.
In your book, you talk about the relative lack of testing pharmaceuticals for elders. Is more being done through NIH, other agencies to correct this? And what should we do to be aware of dangerous medications in older age?
There's actually an article in the Washington Post today that a bunch of us were getting asked about in the media earlier today. It's better. So the NIH published guidelines in the 80s saying that if you include women or people of color in your trials, and if the drugs will be given to those people, no, if you were going to give the drugs to women or people of color, you had to include them in the trials. And then it did the same for children in the 90s. It wasn't until 2019 that they said if you're going to give a medication to an older adult, you need to include older adults in your trial. So now there is a policy, which is great, but a lot of research isn't by NIH. We saw how this played out a bit with vaccines for COVID, where a bunch of the studies had people up through age 75. But as you've seen, they've only been vaccinating people between the ages of 12 and 17 once they extended the trials to that age group. What happened with people over age 75 was that the vaccines weren't tested on them, but they were given to them. So that is second-class citizenship. Like, we're not going to make sure it's safe in you. We're just going to give it to you. Fortunately, it worked really, really well. So we got lucky on that one. But the standard still holds that that people should have been included. We're doing much better. We see routinely more older people included. What you need to say is, did this include people like me in the trial? Sometimes they'll say older and it'll go up to age 70. So if you're over 70, you want to know. It's just a good question to keep asking. And if you want to volunteer for trials, that would be terrific, because the more people are included, the more we'll have accurate results.
You know, I really liked those photos that you used from the Boston campaign. Do you know the background on the campaign? And I know that I think I've seen something here in the city, but what do you have any history?
Yeah, there are lots of city campaigns. So I liked ours much better, and that wasn't just because we were here necessarily, but you know, what they wanted to show was that not everyone who's old is frail, and not everyone who's old is over the hill, if over the hill means like out of touch and out of date. But I find the entire framing of that troubling. So maybe if you're 86, you're not as good at computers as a 16-year-old. Well, a 16-year-old's been using computers. I mean, you see those itty bitty babies swiping, right? I mean, they can all use an iPhone at 13 months. So your brain developed differently. That's not about being out of touch. That's being, you know, generationally appropriate. Supposedly, we all prefer the music we listen to as teenagers. So if you're not listening to the music of today, which I don't even know what it is, actually, if I'm perfectly honest, I don't really care. So, you know, why can't I listen to what I like? Why does that make me out of touch? Maybe they're out of touch with what I'm doing. I think the whole frame is somewhat unequal when it comes to age. There's an assumption that new or young is better. You know, do I look at our students and I think, why are they all so beautiful? Yes, you know, we all have these thoughts, and we can do more to open it up to everybody. So I just, with the Boston campaign, I think it's harmful a little bit, especially that guy who says I'm not frail. When I look at him with my geriatrician eyes, the clock is ticking on his frailty, right? Months to years would be my guess for him. And now he's created a world in which maybe it won't be okay for him to be who he is. And that doesn't, you know, his humanity is still in him. So we need to be okay to be frail. I'm not saying you have to look forward to it. I'm just saying, let's create a world in which it won't be awful to be frail.
And then just a couple of last questions. Is there a listing of spaces where seniors, quotation mark, can go to maintain balance? And then also, is there a list of geriatricians at UCSF?
There is. You can't actually get in to see either an internist or a geriatrician for the last 6 months. So if you really want to make noise about my pet peeve, primary care, like we have no primary care access. We don't have nearly enough, like you can't even see an internist who doesn't know much about your older body, much less a geriatrician. So that's a huge issue. They don't invest in that. Well, I mean, you see on all the missives, it's like, oh, we have another center to study stuff that might help people in 50 years, which is great. But what about the people now? Because we actually know how to help people now, but we don't actually invest in that. So there is a list of geriatricians. If you go to the division website, we're at all different sites. So the VA has a good clinic. SF General has a clinic at UCSF Health. There is a clinic on Geary Boulevard called the Center for Geriatric Care. There's a house calls program, and then a variety of us are embedded in other clinics. So one of my practices now is through the Osher Center. And there's someone at Women's Health, and there's someone somewhere else. And for balance, the physical therapy department has a balance clinic. There are lots of good balance programs online. So Always Active does a lot of balance training. And if you do the UC gym, just ask them about that. They had a week free membership at one point, and I did it, and a bunch of the things that people were doing were good, but I could see some older people online trying to keep up with the person or do certain things that might not have been a good idea to start. So it'd be nice if they had some age-friendly programming.
Well, thank you. As usual, always very informative and engaging. I'll let Sandra take over from here.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, you're on mute. Yeah, you're on mute.
Thank you, Dr. Aronson. And I love it because I've heard you before, but this was totally different and just as interesting and stimulating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Now we're moving on to our Francis Larraguetta Awards, which we give every year. But I wanted to introduce Dan Kilpatrick, who's on our board, who knew Francis very well, to talk a little bit about Francis. Go ahead, Dan.
Good evening. Good afternoon, I should say. It's good to see everybody who has joined us. It is always a pleasure to talk about Francis Larraguetta, to remember her, to acknowledge the leadership that she had with this organization. She was the guiding light for the Retiree Association. And Francis was also the ultimate volunteer, so it's most appropriate that we name this award that we give annually to Francis Larraguetta. Recently, a neighbor, and that Francis was my neighbor, and a neighbor and I were talking, and she was talking about the tree in our neighborhood that she calls the tree surrounded with bureaucracy, that it always needs some attention, and it's so difficult to get that attention. And after hearing her story, I said, well, how has this been taken care of in the past? And without hesitation, she said, Francis always took care of this. Francis knew exactly what to do. We never had a problem when Francis was here. And I think we all share that appreciation for Francis. And speaking of here in San Francisco, our colleague and fellow board member, Lisa Corella, has a way of always making San Francisco a small town. And she recently did that with locating, I will say, Francis's nephew, Steve Larraguetta. And we are very honored today, thanks to Lisa, to have Steve Larraguetta and his wife joining us. It's a privilege and honor, Steve.
Well, thank you, Dan. And I'm sure I probably ran into you in the neighborhood back in the days at some point in time. But anyway, my name is Steve Larragetta. I'm the oldest nephew of Francis, and I'm here with my wife, Kathy. Francis, by the way, in our family was known only as Tia. So when you hear me speak, I will refer to her only as Tia because that's who she was to us. First, I want to thank you guys for inviting me to speak on Tia's behalf in honor of the recipients of the awards today. It's truly an honor and a pleasure. Those of you that knew Tia knew that she never married. She never had children. She had one sibling, that was my dad. And as a result of that, she was very close to me, my sister, my two brothers, and she was like a mother to all of us and really a grandmother to our children, which is great. I live here in the Bay Area, so she knew my children very well, and they speak of her often, even to this day. Tia was a real doer. She pushed all of us that she loved and that she worked with to get things done, to get them done right. And she was, very inspirational, and she encouraged all of us to be our best selves in every way. We truly, truly miss her. UCSF was her other family. She really loved her work. She loved all the people she worked with. She spoke of them often. When Tia retired, she stayed in very close touch with all of her UCSF friends, as all of you know, and remained very involved in what was going on in the office. I think she was probably working as hard when she retired as when she was working. She often got people together for different events with her coworkers, and eventually that grew and the groups got bigger, and she kept on scheduling events. And the next thing you knew, she started this UCSF Retiree Association, was instrumental in getting that going and getting that off the ground. And I can't tell you how impressed I am with your organization and the bond that all of you have. I've been retired for just over 5 years. I worked for 35 years in a career in healthcare insurance and employee benefits consulting. 25 of those years were with one organization. And I can say that after 5 years of being retired, I'm still in touch with maybe 10 of my coworkers I worked with over the years. So to see all of you still connected says a lot about your career experiences that you had at UCSF and what a family you guys had and what a bond you all had. When we became aware of the Retiree Association that had an award in Tia's name, which came through the connection through Lisa Corella, because I'm very good friends with her brother. We became extremely honored in the family and very pleased. And then later on, once we learned what the award was given out for and the volunteerism and the things that it represented, we were even more proud to say that we're, part of her family and part of your organization in an extended way. So I'd like to close by saying thanks to all of you. Thanks to the association board for honoring Tia and for putting this award in her honor. And then also I'd like to congratulate all past and current recipients of the award. So thank you. I really enjoyed today's presentation and being part of this.
Thank you, Steve and Kathy. Thank you so much for joining us and for those warm remarks about Francis. Now I am happy to turn to our board member, colleague, Vicki Lowe, who is going to announce our winners for the Francis Larragetta Award for 2020 and also for 2021.
Hello, everyone. I have the pleasure of announcing the winners of the Francis Larragetta Award for 2020 and 2021. Both of the recipients exemplify the passion, selflessness, and spirit of volunteerism for which Ms. Larragetta will always be remembered. The recipient of the Francis Larragetta Award of 2020 is Barbara Coulter. Barbara worked as a nurse in pediatrics, adult medical, surgical, and nursing administration for 36 years before her retirement in 2004. For the last 17 years since her retirement, she has been a volunteer at the Yosemite Conservancy, where her work of communicating with donors and writing thousands of thank you letters for their support have been the bedrock of the Conservancy's successful fundraising program. Additionally, Barbara serves as an ambassador to the Conservancy's work by attending regional and in-park events, bringing friends and introducing new people to the organization, which have been invaluable to the Yosemite Conservancy's organization. Barbara has also served as a board member of the UCSF Retirees Association, She is one of the first organizers of the hiking club, which originated 10 years ago and continues to be well participated by our retirees. The UCSF Retirees Association would like to recognize Barbara's steadfast support of the Yosemite Conservancy and her enthusiasm and active role in the Retirees Hiking Club by awarding her the Frances Lauregatta Award for 2020. Okay, the recipient of the Frances Lauregatta Award of 2021 is Bob Herman. Bob retired from UCSF in 2017 after over 11 years of service. He was invaluable as a program manager in IT for mission-based hospitals and labs. Bob was nominated for the Frances Lauregatta Award for his volunteer work with the Alliance for Smiles organization. The mission of Alliance for Smiles is to repair children's cleft palate anomalies in underserved areas of the world. In November 2019, Bob traveled to Egypt with the Alliance for Smiles organization, where at the Aswan Hospital, Bob helped patients navigate through paperwork, language barriers, and challenging circumstances with leadership, compassion, and competence. Bob is also an active member of the San Francisco Rotary Club and serves as a board director for Rotacare Bay Area. Rotacare is a volunteer alliance of medical professionals, organizations, and community members dedicated to providing free health care services to uninsured families and individuals with limited ability to pay for medical care. In 2017, Bob offered his experience and management skills to Rotacare and helped implement and organize an electronic medical record-keeping system known as EMR, which help healthcare professionals and patients navigate through the healthcare system. Bob's passion and goal is to live the mission of service above self. He reminds us of someone who also had the same passion and goal, Frances Lauregatta. The UCSF Retirees Association is proud to recognize Bob Herman's volunteer work by awarding him the Frances Lauregatta Award for 2021. Congratulations to Barbara and Bob. Bob, did you want to say a few words?
I just want to first of all say how humbled I am to receive this award from such an established leader, to thank both Sandra and Gail for doing a great job in leading the retirees, and to a wonderful presentation today by Dr. Aronson. It is what makes me UCSF proud, and to be a leader in doing good works for others. You know, you learn from our UCSF system, and you take those lessons in education and you feed the world and nourish the world in doing good. So thank you so much on behalf of myself and my family. Thank you.
Barbara, would you like to say a few words?
I can't outdo what Bob just said. I have to go totally along with whatever he said. And I want to thank everybody for recognizing the wonderful time that I've had at the Yosemite Conservancy being a volunteer. It's been a pleasure for me, and I have really enjoyed every moment of it, as well as the time I've spent with the Retirees Association, along with the board and the hiking. And I've also been involved with the Out to Lunch group. And I'm going on the hike this Friday.
Thank you. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
So thank you very, very much. And I really appreciate, and both of you volunteers, and the fact that we have this award honoring Frances. And I knew her very well too, and she was quite an impressive woman. So this is actually going to be the end of the official program, but I hope you're going to stay around because we will have the breakout rooms that you can have time and to speak with other retirees. And I guess I'm going to have Louis introduce Louis, and he's going to talk a little bit about the breakout rooms and how they're going to work. But first of all, I do want to thank Louis and Annalisa, who we have done, who have really planned and put together this virtual luncheon. Louis talked about doing this last year at Christmas time for the holiday luncheon. And I said, how can we possibly have a virtual luncheon? Well, he and Annalisa and his team made this work. So I just want to thank him very, very much. We depend on Louis for all of our administrative duties as well. But Louis, thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the program. We really enjoy putting these together, and we really appreciate your participation and joining us, because if you weren't here, there would be no point in planning this. So as Sandra said, this is the official end of the program, but if you would like